The CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
All right, well, welcome. We're now joined by Marshall Scott, what's your official title? Everything, all things for Pistols Firing?
Yeah, I write on tax documents and stuff. I write CEO because it sounds the coolest of anything.
Yeah.
President gets written on something. I don't like president as much. I like CEO more. But yeah, writer it seems like my main job.
I feel like CEO is one of those where that just sounds more new age, versus president.
Yeah, I don't even, I guess I know what the CEO letters stand for, but there's like COO, there's a bunch of C's that I don't even know what the letters stand for.
I have learned that with my new job, what a lot of those letters stand for, and honestly, it just is do whatever they say.
Yeah.
Yep. Keep going. Well, want to get you on here, of course, talk Oklahoma State basketball, football, a little baseball as well, too. But first and foremost, both of us went to OSU together, graduated journalism school. You've carried on in the journalism path. I've taken a different one. But with that being said, one thing I've always admired that you're doing is you're asking the harder questions to anyone who goes to basically at the school that you went to, right? I would think that'd be one of the harder things to do, being part of media, but also going, hey, you know what? I know this might ruffle some feathers, especially from people that I admire or, do admire, used to, or currently still looking up to. How do you handle that? How do you handle just kind of asking those tough questions to people who seem like gods to somebody like me,
Yeah, it's, I don't know. It's interesting in that, sometimes I don't even really know that I'm doing it. I think that's just kind of, shout out to the journalism school, shout out to Ray Murray for kind of instilling that kind of stuff in you. But I think, the Gundy situation that I ran into a couple years ago, I think that kind of, I think it was in a good way, it was learning a process for me. Not that I shouldn't have asked the question, but it kind of was good for me in that, okay, this is real life. This isn't you're not in journalism class anymore. So, I think that's just kind of where it starts was with Ray Murray. Shout out Ray Murray. And then from there, I don't know. It just feels like the right thing to do sometimes. But I don't know. I feel like lately, since the Gundy thing, I've had a new perspective on it, and been kind of, I don't know, thinking about what my role is in this big thing. And I'm not sure that I found that totally yet.
Well, I'd say you're doing a heck of a stellar job, because when it comes down to it, and there's any Oklahoma State thing I want to know, I can look up and see something on Twitter from what looks like to be some type of animal combined with some Oklahoma State fan or some type of Oklahoma State kind of insignia or deal, or there's also me who could tweet out something. I'm kind of making fun of myself here, but when I want to know something, I'm like, okay, are there actually rumors? Is there actually any information to it? Whatever. I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna go Pistols Firing. That's it.
I appreciate that. That's what we want to be.
Of course. Well, I do want to ask you here. So with the new teams joining the Big 12, the football season schedule this year doesn't look to be too easy. Mm-hmm. But then again, we dodged some bullets, but we also got a lot of tough opponents here on the schedule too, with back-to-back Utah, K-State, Colorado at the end of the season just being an away game in Denver in November. Wouldn't be too much fun due to the weather, all type of stuff. But what do you expect out of the football team this year, kind of after seeing all this off-season type of stuff and spring practice being wrapped up?
Yeah, it's been interesting in that, especially the spring. Usually spring, you're like, okay, what position battle is happening? But with OSU returning so much, I think ESPN Analytics tweeted out something yesterday that they're the second most returning production in the country behind Iowa State, and Iowa State was all right last year, but they weren't on Oklahoma State's level aside from the game that they played, I guess. But so it was weird. The spring was weird in that we didn't really learn too much new. There wasn't too much new to learn. Kind of questions I have are receiver depth, because they've got 4 guys that have caught passes, and behind those guys, there's not a lot there. And if you've watched Oklahoma State football over the last couple of years, you know that 4 receivers probably isn't going to last throughout a season. So that's kind of something I'm interested in. The pass rush is something I'm sort of interested in. They're going to go down to some more 4-down fronts. That's kind of like a deeper level, nerdy kind of thing. But so that's interesting. But yeah, just with the spring, with the newcomers in general, I think it's going to be an interesting year. Obviously, Utah, you'll know right away in terms of Big 12 schedule what Oklahoma State's like. You'd expect them to be pretty good just based on how they finished last year. But also, there were a lot of close games that maybe shouldn't have been as close. Even thinking after there's obviously the South Alabama game that went horribly wrong. You lose to Iowa State. Even there were points against Arizona State that weren't totally comfortable. But even going past that, like the BYU game, the last game of the regular season, you're kind of down big and have to come back and win in double overtime or triple overtime or whatever it was. And Ollie Gordon's got to run through 9 guys to get in the end zone, and Trey Rucker's got to somehow strip a tight end and recover that fumble. So, I think you see a lot of the Vegas projections, and it's maybe lower than Oklahoma State fans think that they should be, just based on the 10 wins that they got to last year. But I think maybe that's not that I'm saying that that's where the number should be, but maybe that's what Vegas is seeing, that the number that they played such close games, things along that nature, that maybe this will be close again. So yeah, I don't know. I think we'll be, you'll know instantly with Utah. You might know instantly with South Dakota State. Like if that's another struggle, that might be kind of interesting. And then, you get West Virginia, who I think is a pretty sneaky team this year. K-State, who you mentioned. So yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty fun year.
On the fun aspect of it, though, is this kind of going to be one of those years where, okay, hey, we have all the pieces. You talk about everyone returning, where, okay, it's Big 12 championship expectations at minimum, or is that kind of the maximum expectations we should have?
No, I think that I think minimum in terms of expectations, I think it should be to get back there, just based on, you're returning Ollie Gordon, you're returning, I think, like 6 pretty ingrained starters on the offensive line. And then you bring in Isaiah Glass from Arizona State, who throughout the spring everybody spoke pretty highly of. You've got Alan Bowman back, and there are people who are on the fence about Alan Bowman still, but he was good enough to win 10 games last year. So I think expectations should be high. Just with Mike Gundy's track record of producing wins. I think fans' expectations should be high. Could there be room for a letdown? Maybe. Think back to, what was it, it was 2019 that Chuba went crazy, and then he came back for 2020, I think is how it went. And he was dealing with some injuries, and maybe didn't necessarily have the season that he wanted. But I think there's maybe a little bit more fail-safes than just Ollie Gordon. They go get Trent Howland from Indiana, a big running back, to, just in case just in case anything does go wrong with Ollie, you've got him there. You've got Brendan Presley, you've got Rashad Owens. I was so impressed with Dejon Stribling last year before he got hurt. So I think, even past Ollie Gordon, which is, the national people will see Ollie Gordon is this team. But I think even past that, I think there's room for optimism there. Could there be a letdown? Sure, that's college football. But yeah, I think expectations should be on the Big 12 championship level.
Well, when it comes down to it, do you think our weakness on offense is kind of, you're talking about Bowman kind of being, people are undecided. I'm not necessarily asking where you stand on him, but always hearing about new quarterback recruit. Zane Flores was the hottest thing since sliced bread not too long ago, but now we've got another guy, and Rangel, I believe, is still on the roster, etc. I think Gunner at least is still not transferred, but still in the portal. So how's that all playing out? Yeah,
so Alan Bowman, I think, will be the ingrained guy, just because that's kind of how Gundy rolls. It's always been, he's always valued experience, and it's hard to knock him for that, just because of all the success that he's had. But then, I've heard a lot of Zane Flores hype, even through spring, even through, like last year, just seeing him, he's bigger than he looks. You see the long hair, and you think he kind of looks cool, but he's like a legit 6'4". I don't know what they list him at, weight wise, but he's a pretty big dude. I was impressed with Garrett Rangel last year. I kind of thought he got the short end of the straw in the 3 quarterback rotation deal. I think he was like injured a week of practice, or he's sick or something like that. And then so he missed out on some reps while they were still rotating quarterbacks. So I thought that, he was right there with Bowman at least. I think the quarterback room is really deep. Gundy said during the early spring that Gunner's going to go play somewhere that's not Oklahoma State, is what it sounded like. So, but even with those 3 guys, then you mentioned the recruit. I don't know how to say his first name still. I've looked at the pronunciation guide and still don't know how to say it, but his last name's Smith. He probably won't factor into things this year, but he could be a pretty good prospect. So I think that it'll be Alan Bowman's job to lose. I don't think he's going to lose it throughout the year. I know there's been a lot of hype about Zane, hype that I bought into also, but I just think with how big this year is, in terms of you have everybody bringing back, throwing in a quarterback who would be playing his first snaps, I just don't know that that's kind of the route that OSU would want to go. If it was a lighter year, where maybe in thinking back to like last year, where there were kind of like a lot of unknowns. Ollie kind of broken out, but that West Virginia game in the rain 2 years ago, he'd kind of broken out, but the team was going through a lot of transitions. Like I think that would maybe be a time for a young quarterback to kind of step in. But with all the expectations this team has, I think you want to go steady with Alan Bowman.
Yeah, I like watching Alan Bowman play a lot. He does remind me just from his moving ability in the pocket, like Brandon Whedon. But of course, he's just not not the same guy. I mean, granted, if he was, it would be a different spot. You did talk about Stribling earlier, though. Is there? I mean, I'm a big Rashad Owens fan myself here, but then again, he's a late bloomer, I would say. He's been with the team for several years. Are there other guys besides kind of, Presley, Stribling, him that we should know about?
Well, there's Talon Shetron, who, if he can stay healthy, I think he's got it. He was such a highly touted recruit, was committed to Oklahoma, flips his commitment to Oklahoma State, which was a big deal back when it happened. He just needs to stay healthy. That's kind of his thing right now is needing to stay healthy. And aside from that, it's going to be guys that, the normal fan might not know about. And honestly, even me, who's a little more ingrained in this kind of thing, is kind of just waiting to see. Is it like a Tyke Andrews, the former Enid guy? Jalen Pope, I've heard his name, Cameron Hurd. So the kind of that class of receivers who I think they were all true freshmen last year. I imagine one or two of them is going to have to step up this year. Which one it's going to be, I'm not quite sure yet.
Yeah, I'm real curious to see how we do on the offense side of the ball and what kind of changes, especially if we stick to kind of the running game plan. It seemed like we liked a lot last year, or if we change it at all. Have you seen anything kind of spring practices that would suggest, hey, maybe we are going to get back to the Mason Rudolph, to James Washington, air raiding it out, or do you think we stick with Ollie? Yeah,
I don't think it's going to go that far in that direction to the Rudolph days, as much as that's when we were in school and it was so much fun to watch. But I think it's going to be a heavy dose of Ollie. Gundy's kind of said that he wants to lighten Ollie's load up a little bit, and he said similar things with Chuba when Chuba was really getting, and I think even going back to Justice Hill. Obviously, Ollie's bigger than those guys and can, hypothetically carry a little bit more. But you saw last year there were times where he'd have to limp off the field and he'd get on the bike and he'd, do that for 5 minutes and then run back on the field. So, he's mentioned, lighting the load a little bit. So maybe that gets a little bit more room for Brendan Presley, for Dejon Stribling and Alan Bowman. But yeah, I think for the most part, I think offensively things are going to be pretty similar to what they were last year.
Well, sounds great. What did you think about on the defensive side of the ball? Nardo's, and I know he's still kind of the co-defensive with, as well with DeForest there.
It's with Joe Bob Clements.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I think Nardo is. I think it's Nardo, and then I think Nardo is the DC, and I think they list Joe Bob as co-DC. I don't know that it's a full co. I don't know how they do that, but yeah. It was an interesting first year just in that, A, you're implementing a new system, the 3-3-5. That's something that Oklahoma State hadn't done a ton of. And then B, the back end was so young. You had Kendall Daniels back there, but then aside from that, it was a lot of young guys. Trey Rucker, obviously, he had some experience as well, and Corey Black. But there were so many young safeties that were, kind of just getting thrown into the fire and being asked to figure it out. At that same time, you're transitioning Colin Oliver to linebacker. So I as up and down, I think, as things were defensively, I don't know that you could fully pin that on Nardo just with all the transition that was kind of happening there. But yeah, they've talked a lot about, more 4-down fronts, and it seems like Colin Oliver is going to start playing closer to the line of scrimmage like he was during his freshman year, whenever he was so, good. And you think back to the Caleb Williams sack in Bedlam and things like that. And then it seems like Kendall Daniels, and I think he's listed at 6'4", 240 right now. It sounds like he's going to be moving a little bit closer. So, it's been debated a little bit whether that actually means linebacker or whether, they're just kind of shifting things. Defense is so fluid these days that it's hard to totally tell. But, it seems like Colin Oliver's going to be stepping closer. Maybe Kendall Daniels kind of fills in a linebacker-ish kind of role. And then obviously you got Nick Martin from last year, who is incredible. I think defensively it's going to be a step forward if they can find a way to get pressure on quarterbacks, which didn't help with their, young defensive secondary last year, that they also weren't getting pressure on quarterbacks and forcing, those guys were standing back there and being able to pick those young guys apart. So, I think this defense should take a step forward in year two. It's probably going to look a little bit different than maybe even Nardo's used to. But I think just with the pieces they have, it'll be a more successful season defensively.
Yeah, I got to say, I was skeptical at first, but then Nardo seemed to kind of round out the year at least well enough for us to get 10 wins, which is all I care about. And I don't think there's any way we were beating Quinn Ewers in Texas at the time.
Yeah, that game seemed like a formality rolling in just with all the momentum that Texas had, with the athletes they had. Oklahoma State was a little banged up. Ollie didn't touch the ball a ton in that game in general. So yeah, that game is because I was in the building for the 21 game against Baylor. And, going into that game, the feeling was like Oklahoma State's going to win this thing. And it was a totally different feeling walking into AT&T Stadium this past year. It just didn't feel realistic with where Oklahoma State was and with the athletes that Texas had. And usually, Gundy's been really good against Texas, but that Texas team last year was a little bit different than they had been in the past.
It was nice that at least they challenged Washington in the in the college football playoffs. So it wasn't like, oh, they just got their kind of got blown out or something, and it was, how do we judge this OSU team? So it was nice that they put up a fight there. When it comes to kind of the maximum expectations, though, do you think, hey, you know what, with the new team playoff, we could be hosting a game? Do you think the Big 12 kind of has, a couple other teams in it as well?
Yeah, so I think I haven't dove too deeply, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Big 12 gets 2 teams in. And with that, you'd think Oklahoma State is in the running there. Just we talked about the expectations they should have. So I think the expectation is to if the expectation is to win the Big 12, then the expectation at this point with how the playoff is set up is to make the college football playoff. So as far as hosting and stuff, it's so new and foreign to me that I haven't thought too much about it. And honestly, talking to the guys, they kind of seemed to be more focused on the Big 12 title, but at this point, literally winning a Big 12 title would mean you're in the playoff. So I think that's a fairly real expectation as well.
Well, it's always great to hear. Would love to get back to that 2011. And add another name at least on the side of BPS. When it comes to kind of the whole offseason changes that Oklahoma State's gone through athletic-wise, right? New wrestling head coach, new basketball head coach. Which do you think makes the biggest change for OSU going, for either team going forward on how good they could be? Yeah,
I think, I didn't know, admittedly, a ton about David Taylor. My wrestling knowledge, I feel like I'm more knowledgeable than the average Oklahoma State, casual football watcher, things like that. But my wrestling knowledge is very confined to Oklahoma State. So David Taylor being a Penn State guy and things like that, I honestly didn't know a ton about him. I'd heard of Magic Man before and things like that. But then just the fallout and watching, I've been listening to podcasts and watching videos in the wrestling world, this is a huge deal that they've got David Taylor on staff here. And they're talking about, the future and recruits are really going to want to come, wrestle here. And they're talking about the, money that's being thrown around with the Paycom CEO and stuff getting involved and things like that. So I think long term, this David Taylor hire, if it goes well, which many people expect that it will, I think this is kind of game changing in the world of college wrestling, which it kind of needed to shake up with how dominant Penn State's been. At the same time, I love the Steve Lutz hire. Getting a guy we talked about. There's Darian DeVries, the former Drake coach now at West Virginia. Danny Sprinkle, he goes to Washington, and Steve Lutz. And you if you just blind resume them, they were all fairly similar. But more people were just talking about DeVries and Sprinkle right off the rip. So they kind of got more of the pub. But if you kind of blind resumed them all, they were all very similar. And then on top of that, Lutz has more ties to Texas, which is obviously a ginormous recruiting ground for Oklahoma State. So I think that might have worked out really perfectly for Oklahoma State. It seems like a great coach. We don't know a ton about him yet. I've only met with him once, but it seems like a great coach. Has been a head coach for 3 seasons and made the tournament all 3 of those seasons. So, that's enough for me. He's still got some roster work to do. As we're taping this, I think he's got 4 scholarships left. Doesn't have a big man yet. So everything as far as the short term is a little TBD. But in the long term, I think this was another good hire from Chad Weiberg.
Yeah. Well, on the transfer front there for basketball, which of the transfers do you think were you most impressed by, or do you like the most kind of fitting in for the team? And how do you think it gels with the guys who are still on the roster?
Yeah. So the Devontae Davis story is just cool because he was committed to Oklahoma State. And then he decommits the way I remember, which has been a while. It was somewhat out of nowhere, but then that was kind of the tea leaves that, hey, Cade Cunningham is coming here because they played the same position. So that's just kind of a cool story that, he was committed to OSU for a long time, ends up going to Arkansas and finds his way back to Stillwater. That's just a fun story. I kind of really like Marcellus Avery. I think he goes by Chi-Chi from UCF. Long, I think he's 6'7", can shoot threes. That's, for me, that's all I ask for in basketball players is length and shooting ability. So I think that's good. I think Robert Jennings, Texas Tech transfer, underrated. I think you look. I think he averaged 4.6 points a game, which is nothing crazy. But menace on the offensive glass. He's like, if they had to play right now, he would play the center, which is probably not ideal. But the fact guy who can move like he does and is able to play in the front court like that. I think that with Steve Lutz's style of go. I think that fits in well. Arturo Dean, the Florida International point guard, led the country in steals last year. And you talk about Steve Lutz's tempo that starts on the defensive end and getting the ball and going. So I think you can see the through lines for everybody that he's grabbed so far of like, okay, this is why he thinks that this is going to fit here. So I don't have any complaints about those guys right now. As far as how they fit with guys on the roster, I think right now I wrote something yesterday that they kind of team needs at this point. Size was one of them, as we've already discussed, and kind of scoring is another. There are guys who can score, but like they haven't necessarily done it at this level. So that's just kind of interesting. So you might be asking a ton of Bryce Thompson, who I think gets way too much hate from the Oklahoma State fan base. Bryce has stepped onto campus and done nothing but average double figures in scoring. So I'm a big Bryce Thompson guy, but with the current roster setup, I think that they might be asking a ton of him. Then you're Jamiron Keller and Connor Dow. Connor Dow, you're just looking for more development. Kind of an unfair situation for those guys to be having to play so much. Jamiron obviously probably shined a little bit more than Connor Dow. I don't think that's unfair to say. But Jamiron, you're looking for that step forward in terms of defense, in terms of playmaking ability, in terms of scoring, if that's what this team's going to need. And then Connor Dow, you're just looking for another year of development. I think Connor's ceiling is very high. He's length. He's got length. He's athletic. You think of white kids on recent Oklahoma State teams, and you think, oh, this kid's a shooter. Connor is that, but he's also got much more athleticism than a Thomas DeZagua or a Phil Forte or things like that. So I think his ceiling's really high. It's just about development. But yeah, I think with his current setup, they're going to be asking a lot of Bryce Thompson, which I'm excited about, but I know that some Oklahoma State fans might not be.
Yeah, why do you think Bryce gets kind of that unfair blame? Is it because he was a former 5-star who originally committed to OSU but then decommits and goes to Kansas, or is there just kind of it seems like to me at least he's underwhelming in his performances. He doesn't do always the best job in every single game, but that's a lot to ask for, especially given the team he's had to play with. Yeah,
I think it is all on the star rating because somebody decided that he as a 17 or 18-year-old was a 5-star recruit, was a McDonald's All-American. So then he's got these expectations of, why isn't he playing like Cade Cunningham? Well, Cade Cunningham was that's different gravy right there. So I think that's where it starts. And that's where Mike Boynton has talked a lot about with Bryce and kind of like the scrutiny that he's under is that, he's got so much outside noise and it's not even his doing really, that kind of surrounds him, that the expectations for Bryce were just, crazy high. So I think that's where it comes from. But if you just kind of look in a vacuum of what Bryce Thompson has done, he's going to, he's already 1,000-point scorer in his career. But some of those points came at Kansas, obviously, but he's going to be 1,000-point scorer just in OSU. I think I did the math on like if he's, averages about where he should, I forgot what number, but he's going to be in like the top 20 all-time scorers in program history. So like, and he's, an Oklahoma kid, does everything right. Kind of sounds like Mike Gundy at this point, but I think that for all those reasons that he should be really celebrated in the Oklahoma State fan base.
Well, hopefully we can get him back as a future coach unless he goes to spend several years in Europe, or even if after he does that or whatever. With that being said, do you think there's any current NBA kind of draft prospects we have on the basketball roster? And I mean, it's tough for me to think that we do, honestly, just given last year and how many guys left. And I mean, Garrison's the guy who comes immediately to mind as possibly having that NBA type of deal, but he went to Kentucky, so he should.
Yeah, I think, as far as last year's team, I think, Brandon Garrison, I think that he's got an NBA ceiling. I think Eric Daly probably has an NBA ceiling, just, being 6'8" and kind of doing all the things that he's able to do. As far as this current group, it's a lot about fit and situation for some of these guys. You think of like Lindy Waters, you would have never thought, that he's, not only on an NBA roster, but on the 1 seed, like that. It's just kind of crazy that his ability, he found out that he just needs to shoot the crap out of the ball. And that's, what he does when he gets in there. So I think that Bryce could, if the fit was right, I think Bryce could, be that type of player. I wouldn't count out a Jamiron Keller type. Not that he would have I don't know that he's totally high, NBA ceiling, but just with kind of the stuff that he's able to do, he's kind of got that bulldog mentality. I think that plays a big part in it. But yeah, without seeing the transfers live, really, I have no clue on those guys.
Yeah, I'm curious to see the Robert Jennings one and then the Arturo Dean are the two that I know more about as transfers. I haven't really dug into the rest of them, but I'm curious to see how they gel. kind of you're getting as well.
Yeah, like I said, you kind of can see kind of the through line that Steve Lutz is kind of putting here, and it's an emphasis on defense, it's an emphasis on kind of grit almost. That's kind of an overused word in basketball, I think, but I think that the group that he has right now is kind of in that. So you can see the line. Just for the love of God, somebody sign a guy that's at least 6'9".
Seems like since Mitchell Solomon's been on the roster, we've needed that. We've needed that one other guy. I mean, Cisse was kind of, but man, it just was such a hit and miss.
Caleb Boone had his ups too. His highs were incredibly high, his lows were incredibly low. That was kind of the Caleb Boone experience. I think I loved every minute of it, but it was also, imagine, even for Mike Boynton, incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it had to be for sure. I'm still curious what at the end of the day happened there, because it seemed like he left UNLV and went to go play with Keelan, and that was kind of a good story at the end of the day. But then again, he was checked out in those NIT games. At least it looked like that on TV, I'll say.
Yeah, him and Keelan both kind of had their ups and downs with the program. Obviously, being Tulsa kids, they were fan favorites. But yeah, there were some peaks and valleys there.
For sure. Well, on the pro side, I do want to ask you about football. Besides Ollie, is there another guy? Hey, this guy could be NFL kind of talent, NFL kind of ready after a year.
I think if Kendall Daniels is such an in-betweener right now. We mentioned him, is he safety? Is he a linebacker? I think if they can figure that out, he is an NFL guy. I think, it's kind of like, who was it? Isaiah Simmons, the Clemson guy from a couple years ago. They weren't really sure what to do with him. He was, obviously an extreme example. I think he's like a top 10 pick or something. But like, I think if they can just kind of figure out his role, I think he's an NFL type talent. I think Dejon Stribling is an NFL talent. Just he's got the size. His footwork seemed really good. And this is after 4 games of watching him. So like, maybe don't hold me too hard to that. Outside of that, I love Nick Martin. He's going to, get clowned on. I don't know if clowned on's the right word. There are going to be questions brought up about his size, for a linebacker at the NFL level, but he is just the toughest dude that I think I've ever covered. It seems like, I'd love for Brendan Presley to get a shot. With Presley, his side to side speed is elite. I think maybe what some teams will caution on is his straight line speed. With that size, you can be small and a receiver in the NFL, but you've got to, have burners. So I think given the right situation, given, just kind of the advancement of the modern game of football, I think Brendan Presley's got a shot. Outside of that, I think that's all I've got on my mind right now. But I'm sure there's going to be guys that make camps and get all that good stuff. Justin Kirkland, you could clog up the middle. Same with Colin Clay. So there'll be guys that have their shots for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those years where, of course, we have this many returning starters. We're not going to get guys drafted, but every year that goes by that we have no draft picks, it just seems like, okay, something weird happened. I was glad to see, Leon Johnson, several others got at least signed to practice squads and get their fair share and get their trial in the NFL level too. Yeah,
it's kind of the OSU conundrum in that, people want Mike Gundy to recruit better. People want more NFL players from Oklahoma State. But at the same time, it's like, do you want to sacrifice that for all the winning that Mike Gundy's been able to do? Like this is how Mike Gundy wins. So I think that's a point of inflection in the Oklahoma State fan base. I think most fans of most other programs would say, give me the winning every day of the week. So I don't know that it's too justified for Oklahoma State fans to be too worried about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I got to say, when I think about, if you're an Iowa State fan, right, would you rather be an Iowa State fan or an Oklahoma State fan for the past 10 years in football? And I think there's no question about it. You'd rather be an Oklahoma State fan. And really, besides OU in the Big 12, you'd rather be an Oklahoma State fan over the past 10. It just is, both of us as OSU fans, I'm sure it just is kind of annoying after a while. It's like, all right, well, let's win a Big 12 championship. We haven't done that in the past 10 years, but it seems like just, other schools have. OU's won a handful of them, Texas, of course, too, and they're leaving. So what can we do in the new Big 12? With that being said, the kind of the middle of Big 12, there's just the NIL question of like, okay, what's going on behind the scenes? Why are we not able to just pay for guys, get better guys on roster? Do you think that, really whatever sport, but do you think that's more of a culture standpoint or just kind of a, hey, we are a state school, it's an ag school that's, town of, 20, 30,000 people when school's not in session, et cetera?
I think I don't know. It's tough to say. I think it's also new that, and then I'm so focused on Oklahoma State that my horizons maybe aren't like kind of like with wrestling. Like I'm not, what is Arkansas doing in Iowa West? I don't really know. I have no idea. So I don't know. I think that Mike Gundy has taken steps to, I think initially he was kind of stubborn to the fact of change. I think he's embraced it to this point. He's embraced the portal, and overall that seems like it's been a plus for the program. At the same time, as far as bringing transfer people in this year, they didn't need a ton, so it's tough to totally say. What that I'm interested in next year when you're down. Your starting quarterback, Alan Bowman, Ollie Gordon probably going to the NFL draft. I don't know, why he wouldn't. Brandon Presley's out of eligibility. I think Stribling's out of eligibility. Rashad Owens out of eligibility. So I think next year, kind of seeing how they interact with the portal, seeing what type of guys that they could, lure to Oklahoma State. I think that's kind of going to be the big jumping off point of, okay, here's where OSU is in the NIL world. As far as basketball goes, that was kind of like a chicken and the egg scenario. Obviously, Mike Boynton made comments that, ruffled some feathers, but I think looking back at it, I think past this, I think will be overall Mike Boynton saying what he said. And if you didn't hear, he's, was just essentially saying that they're near the bottom in the Big 12 of basketball NIL spending. I think him saying that and finding, and putting it out there, I think in the long term, that's going to be a positive for Oklahoma State, just because this is how the game is played nowadays. It ruffled some people's feathers initially because it's like, well, you're not winning basketball games. Why am I going to donate money? And it kind of becomes a chicken and egg scenario. But as far as the future and kind of raising awareness that hey, this is how this goes now, I think overall that'll be a kind of net positive.
Yeah, I do think Boynton was telling the future a little bit when it comes down to, okay, Calipari asked Kentucky if they wanted to match the Arkansas offer, and Kentucky goes, I think we're good. I mean, granted, losing the first round near Kentucky is different than losing the first round when you're, BYU, for example, or Oklahoma State, et cetera. I'm not comparing to BYU, but just saying Kentucky's just a whole different world there.
Yeah.
When it comes down to Boynton saying that, I was just a big pro because it's like, hey, you know what? We can see how all of it's done, and now he's right. I mean, Calipari goes to Arkansas. I don't think he's going to Arkansas before the NIL exists, right?
Absolutely. And, and you kind of look at the numbers of, I think he said there were like 2 or 3 teams that are spending $2 million, another 5 or 6 that are above $1 million, and they were working at around the 500,000 area. And that's just, I'm not a business mogul by any means, but I imagine if you have that much more resources, double, triple, quadruple the resources, things are probably going to work out a little better for you. And at the same time, though, you wonder, if Mike Boynton was winning more basketball games, could Oklahoma State have done that? Maybe. I don't know. So that's just kind of, like I said, it kind of turned into a chicken and egg scenario in terms of, basketball spending and where the program was at. But maybe with this refresh start with Steve Lutz coming in, maybe, the slate's wiped clean and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, I got to say, going back to kind of the David Taylor hire in wrestling for a second, the biggest thing for me is that I've noticed that there's just a bunch more Oklahoma State engagement on social media from it, and it seems like really just taken off on that. Why do you think this is such a big deal from what you've been able to learn about kind of David Taylor coming over from Penn State? And I know Coleman Scott was kind of the guy who was going to be the wrestling coach, but then, is not at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But why is this such a big deal getting David Taylor? Besides his just kind of accolades, it doesn't seem like he's been a coach before, right?
Yeah, so he hasn't been a traditional college coach at this point. He started, wrestling is like a lifestyle. Like wrestling is so, like the grassroots of wrestling is important. He started a training center for youth called M2 up in State College. And then that kind of bleeds into, college careers. And then post that, there's what's called RTCs, which is where Dayton Fix is going to work. It's going to wrestle for the Cowboy RTC moving forward. And so, but you need a strong, in a lot of terms, strong RTC means strong college program. Strong grassroots means strong college program. So it's all kind of its own ecosystem. You see that like the Stillwater High wrestling program has really taken off seemingly as of late. Maybe it's been, this good all the time, but that's because a lot of kids are literally moving, and their families are moving to Stillwater because they want to then go to Oklahoma State. So it's like wrestling is almost its own beast in the sports world. So I think him coming in, it seemed like a lot of what was important to him in terms of taking this job was to make sure that he was going to have the resources that the RTC is going to strengthen and things like that, and continuing to grow youth wrestling in Oklahoma. So all that is very important. And then as far as him being such a big hire, it's they've been talking about it like it'd be like if Oklahoma State, the football job was open, and you mentioned Coleman Scott. It'd be like if Brandon Whedon was the associate head coach, but then you could also hire like Tom Brady, and it's like, okay, well, I love you, Brandon Whedon, but this is Tom Brady.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the vibe, anyways, that I've gotten. Like I've said, I'm not a crazy huge wrestling guy, but essentially one of the all-time greats, who's literally just finished up his not professional wrestling career, because it's WWE, but his Olympic wrestling career is starting with one of the most historic programs of all time. So I think that's kind of that's what I've learned, I guess, in the days following, of kind of how tide shifting this can be. And he was kind of a key piece to Penn State recruits that Cale Sanderson got there. He wins 2 individual national titles. So it just seems to me like it's going to kind of shift and turn maybe college wrestling on its head a little bit.
I mean, sounds awesome.
Yeah.
That's the main thing I'm taking away. And props to all the media stuff that Oklahoma State's doing, everything like that. Yeah. But without giving them too much credit here, that's the question. So I think you answered it real well. Of, okay, how is this guy relevant to wrestling?
Yeah.
I mean, who is he? And you can look at all the accolades. Okay, he's won all these awards, but then again, it does seem like I'm kind of almost, hey, we're never doing anything bad, right? So like, it seems like every single football, every single year in football, for example, there's the equestrian team comes out, the track team comes out, the wrestling team comes out, and they've all won stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible as an Oklahoma State fan that I try not to take for granted how every single team seems to be top 20 in the country at every single thing. But of course, I'm building up here to kind of the spring sports here in baseball and softball. Softball looks incredible. Did beat OU at OU, so can always say, hey, props on that. Big 12 tournament didn't go the way we wanted, didn't go last year's way, I guess, and didn't win it. But what do you think between baseball and softball? Who do you think has kind of I know softball's 5th in the country and hosting a regional this weekend, but who do you think can go farther, down in the postseason road? Yeah,
I think at this point I would still say softball, but baseball's definitely putting some things together here as of late. The softball team, I just wasn't sure. They'd lost so many pieces, kind of unlike the football team this year. They'd lost so many pieces from last year. You think of your Shining Factors, your Kylie Naomi's, names that have been on all of those World Series rosters. That it's like, okay, this is kind of a reset here. They've got 2 freshmen starting in the infield. They got Talon Edwards starting at third base, who's a sophomore who enrolled early, so she should be a freshman. You lose Kelly Maxwell, and Lexi Kilfoy is now stepping into the ace role, even though she apparently hates the word ace. But that's unfortunately Lexi. That's what you are.
She was Big 12 pitcher of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think you can be called ace and be okay with it.
Yeah. So but it's all just kind of come together. Carly Godwin, the freshman who plays first base, is elite. The transfers they brought in, Jillian Poolyard, I think is how it's pronounced. Caroline Wong, catcher. They've been outstanding. So it seems like Kenny's just kind of kept it rolling. I think they went into the last year's regional having lost like 11 of 13 or something like that. So you mentioned the Big 12 tournament not going maybe the way they want to do it. It's compared to last year, they're doing fine right now. So yeah, with the regional, it's gonna be tough. Having an SEC school and the Big 10 tournament champion in your regional, it's like, oh, that's a little rough. But yeah, I think things are set up for Oklahoma State to make another trip to Oklahoma City in the World Series. The baseball team has they've dealt with a lot of weird injuries throughout the year. It seemed like early they were kind of tinkering with what to do with the pitching staff a little bit. They've locked things in. Brian Holiday's been outstanding, JUCO transfer.
Any relation to the other holidays?
No relation. One L on this holiday. Robert Kranz. I asked the guys during their media day back in February or March, whatever it was. I was like, who's a guy on the roster that people don't know about right now that they are going to know about? And they all kind of collectively agree that it was Robert Kranz, who's been this relief pitcher for him, and he's been nails. And then they've been crushing the baseball. They've been hitting so many home runs. A couple nights ago, I did a little blurb where they've hit 90 plus home runs the last 3 years. They'd only done that once before that, between 2000 and whenever that cutoff was, 2021 or 2022, whatever it was. So Josh Holliday said, like, yeah, we put a little bit more emphasis in, we're not trying to steal 100 bases. We're trying to hit 100 home runs. So it's an exciting, brand of baseball to watch. And they've got the guys to do it. Nolan Schubert is elite. He's going to be an MLB player someday. Carson Bench is just kind of ridiculous. He's just like, if his listed position should just be baseball player. He pitches, he plays right field. I think I've seen him play first a handful of times, maybe last year. He doesn't look like he's going to crush baseballs, but he also crushes baseballs. So yeah, they've been getting a little healthier. Tyler Wolford came back this past week. Aiden Miolo's back. So I think that, in kind of classic Josh Holiday fashion, this team is ramping up at just the right time. Now it's a matter of, kind of getting over that hump of regional disappointment the past couple of years.
Yeah, I got to say, it's a lot of fun to watch baseball games now. I mean, LAP versus O'Brate, there's just no comparison. Yeah. And I'm hoping the softball stadium kind of goes that direction. I know the softball stadium isn't that old to begin with, but then again, it has room for improvement, room for expansion, more or less, is what I'd say, right?
And with as good as the softball team is nowadays, it's just too small. That's just how it is. They make it a great time. Obviously, the deck's out in the outfield and things like that, and they put temporary bleachers out and right. That it's still a fun experience. But I was down at Love's Field, Oklahoma's new stadium, and it's outstanding. It's a beautiful, beautiful stadium, and that's with all the winning that Kenny Gaske and those girls have done, they deserve something similar.
Yeah, have you heard anything at all about kind of I know Oklahoma State was going to build the health and wellness center and just do a bunch of all the renovations. It was like $300 million plus project, but have you heard any updates on that recently at all? I mean, that's something I haven't heard about.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard a ton about that either. I think it seems like wrestling's kind of taking step forwards into getting, them a facility. I think it's supposed to be out in that parking lot that's next to GIA. I think that's like at least whenever the vision plan came out, I think that's where it was. So I think maybe wrestling's the closest, just with, you kind of mentioned, David Taylor and the kind of resources that he wanted to make sure that he had coming into that. That's where I would say it's kind of in the lead right now. But yeah, it's been a year and some change, and nothing too much has moved on that front. But yeah, you would think, if softball kind of just keeps winning, if they keep showing up at the door, at some point somebody will let them in. But I don't have the money so it's hard for me to complain softball deserves a stadium. I'm not going to give the $4 million. It's more than $4 million. I'm not going to give the millions and millions of dollars for it because I don't have it. So. Yeah,
it's always one of the things where I kind of feel bad about asking about NIL questions because I'm like, all right, well, I'm not asking from this of, hey, I just gave money, because I definitely did not.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the promotion that I think you guys did, though, with OSU Athletics of basically, entering the raffle for tickets, all that type of stuff. Was that, who came up with that idea, I guess? How did that come together?
Keontae Roberts just kind of cold called me one day. And I don't know if you ever talked to Keontae, but he can talk. He's got the gift of the gab. So he sold me pretty instantly on it. It was a raffle. I think it's definitely ended now. They just announced the winners, but I think they're kind of coming up with more creative ideas to get the fan base involved, just because it's NIL is such a new thing, and the people who could donate for it are generally older people because they've got the money. But you have to find a way to help the older generation understand, hey, this is how college athletics is played now. Can you help with this? So. I think Post with Purpose has been taking steps forward in terms of engagement, in terms of finding the right avenues to kind of find a way to raise money. I think it's headed in the right direction. Is it going maybe slower than some people hope? Yeah, probably. But like I said, I'm not going to donate the millions of dollars that it takes to do this because I don't have it. So once they figure that out, I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, I got to say I want to give you a second just to kind of tell Oklahoma State fans of what they need to know, what's the coolest, deal. And I know we've ran through lots of topics, but my biggest frustration with Oklahoma State athletics is that I see how many wins certain teams are putting up against, against top 10 teams in the country or ranked opponents in football. And I see how many wins we have over the past 20 years and just all these different stats Oklahoma State's pretty darn close to the top of. And I know there's been some heartbreaking losses, but that happens with every single school. I mean, I'm sure you got family members who are not only fans of OSU, and we kind of know how it goes. I've got several family members who are big Colorado or UCLA or whatever other fans who are like, hey, we actually killed to have OSU's record over the past, whatever years, basically against, and except for in basketball when it comes to UCLA, it's every other sport.
Yeah. It's you think of heartbreaks, but it's almost better to care. Literally every Oklahoma State team gives you a sense of, I care about this. So yeah, I think Oklahoma State's in a good spot in that, even basketball, they haven't had great seasons lately, but like think of the Cade Cunningham year. You think of some runs that those Mike Boynton teams will win on and you're like, okay, I'm invested again. I think that's a good place for any athletic department to be, just to have people that care about it. And for Oklahoma State, it's literally every sport. The women's tennis loss the other day, that was heartbreaking and it's like, why does this entire fan base care about women's tennis? Not that we should or shouldn't, but it's like not a whole lot of people would have cared had their women's tennis team lost a match. But that was a huge blow just because of all the expectations that they had. And it's like, they've got investment in women's tennis. They've got investment in baseball and softball and wrestling and basketball, obviously in football. So yeah, I think as far as the fan base aspect of it goes, I think it would, it's tough to find a more collective group of good teams in Oklahoma State.
Yeah, because I definitely get wanting to be better. I mean, that's something we're all going to yearn for, all going to want. And of course, if we were winning basketball championships or in contention for basketball championships every year, and football, not just in contention for Big 12, but national championships, I doubt you and I'd be sitting here going, so what's the deal with NIL? We'd be going like, all right, cool. Like, I wonder what Gundy's thinking this year. Or, we'd have different, we've got a Heisman Trophy kind of guy on the roster. And this year we do actually. But with that being said, what would you, as just somebody who's in and out of Oklahoma State athletics every single day, just kind of like want every OSU fan to know, is there, hey, you know what? We've got a guy here who's just not as well valued. Is the golf team going to go out and win, the whole entire thing every single year for the next 5 years? Or, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, it comes down to, hey, you know what? Like, football is the sport we should be doing the best at year over year, or maybe even all of the above. Yeah.
So I'm a basketball guy. So I think just in general, I care more about the basketball pieces I write, about the things like that. But I think there's a lot of truth in football is the kind of heartbeat of everything, and it kind of trickles down from there. As far as, NIL goes and getting involved in that, an issue I've kind of had with NIL is that it was like, okay, now the players are getting a piece of the pie. But in reality, it kind of seems like, and maybe I'm off on this, it kind of seems like they just are like trying to create a whole new pie and be like, okay, this is for the players. We're still keeping all of this, but now on top of coming up here every weekend, on top of the tickets you're buying, also donate to the NIL collective. So I have a tough time saying to people, if you want to get involved, if you want your team to do well, donate to Post with a Purpose, say that you should. And if you can, you should. And if that's, something that you're interested in, definitely do it. But I have a tough time when people ask me about it saying, okay, well, you're already paying for tickets. You're already doing this. You're already doing that. So yeah, sorry. I think if you want to see your team do better, NIL's at this point the way that it's going to have to be. But at the same time, like I've been saying, I'm not going to tell people what to do with their money.
Yeah, I do think it becomes a tough part when it's like, hey, you were doing all this, you were spending XY dollars. Now divert your 401k to, Post with the Purpose, or do whatever you can to donate money towards it, because now we need even more money, in some form or fashion, right? But I don't think it's necessarily just wrong. But yeah. To your point, I wish there was, okay, we're selling jerseys in the student union, and every single Oklahoma State football jersey now, instead of all going to the athletic department, it all gets divvied up. But that's just not how. Then you got to charge more for it, right? Yeah. You just gotta increase the amounts, no matter what. I know. Also, just on a completely other thing, we're both big Thunder fans. Absolutely. Thunder after Game 4 last night finally tied it up.
Oh,
got Game 5 coming up on Wednesday. Whenever you're listening to this, recording on Tuesday, just the day before. But what have you been thinking about kind of the foul calls? I'll leave it at that.
So I haven't put. That's just kind of the NBA nowadays. I think maybe it's the journalist in me to where I can't care so much that I'm ticked off about Luka flopping or things like that. It's just basketball these days is a guard driving the lane, throwing his head back, and hoping somebody blows a whistle. And I think that's just kind of how it is. Is Luka overdoing it? Yes. Do I think there's some conspiracy that they want the big market team to win? I don't necessarily know that I'd go that far. I don't know. I was always sort of sorry, my throat is going. I was always sort of scared of the Mavs just because they got Luka and Kyrie. Golly.
You're good.
Haven't had to talk this long in a while. And then on top of that, Mavs fans are kind of obnoxious. Living so close to them. I've got to
go. No. It's one of those things where at the end of the day, I struggle with the whole foul deal because, I'll see something in slow-mo and it changes the whole perspective of what's going on. I mean, last night, for example, in real time when they're showing the replay of Jay Will, number 6, of the ball going, looks like off of him out of bounds.
Yeah.
And he immediately runs over and goes, no, you got to review that. Didn't go off of me. And I'm like, well, I mean, dude, the live play shows it definitely went off of you, whatever. And like, that's me being, trying to not be biased because, of course, it would benefit if I was like, no, I definitely. So then I look at the slow-mo and it's like, oh, it did go off of Derrick Jones Jr. and it is straight out of bounds and it should be our ball. And, oh, it is our ball coming back from break and sweet. But it all happened just like that. And, everyone else I was watching the game with, my dad and youngest brother, were both thinking the exact same thing of, it's not our ball. Crap, when they come back from break, why do we even waste this challenge?
Yeah.
They do and goes for that. But on the other hand, I think that, yes, Luka Doncic is an incredible basketball player.
Yep.
If either of us could trade days with him, I'm sure we would. We'd trade basketball skills. We'd probably trade our entire lives to switch over. Maybe I'm speaking for myself here a little bit here and there. But I think because he is the opponent, right? I mean, I think if it was Anthony Edwards we're playing, who, fingers crossed, this next round is, whoever, we'd also go, well, he does this.
Yeah.
There's always going to be somebody who is going to be the antagonist.
Yeah.
And we're always going to be the protagonist of our own. But you as a fellow big basketball watcher, do you see anything in this Mavs series where you're like, hey, you know what? Like, this is kind of out of the ordinary? Or, I mean,
I think to me, it's just been so normal. And I think I'm trying so hard to not let this series destroy who Luka is for me. I'm like, man, Luka's so good at basketball. I don't want to hate him. I don't want to. I'm trying my best. Like Draymond Green, I'm fine with hating Draymond Green.
Oh yeah,
I do. That's just it. But Luka, and if it happens to be Anthony Edwards next round, Anthony Edwards is so freaking good. He does some corny stuff sometimes, but he's so good at basketball. So I'm trying to not hate him. So I think that's kind of the avenue where I'm going. I also at the same time fully understand people who are on Twitter right now saying Luka's flopping, Luka's not actually hurt, things like that. Just because that's sports at the end of the day. That's what this is all about. So I think maybe it's the journalist in me as to why I'm not so invested in the refs. I'm invested in the games, but I'm not necessarily invested in how it's being called and things along that nature.
Yeah, I gotta say, once I start going, okay, well, he's not injured, or once I start going, he's flopping every possession, or all type of stuff, then I kind of start sounding like an 0-2 Kings fan, where I'm like, we need a whole entire decade plus to figure out exactly what happened in the series, and I can be holding on to my old thoughts and conspiracies for 10 years and be preaching from the mountains, and if I'm wrong, I'm definitely wrong, and then it's almost 100% that I'm going to be wrong. I mean, there's no way that it's going to be, hey, yeah, there's a whole deal and Tim Donaghy. I mean, it just doesn't happen like that, really. And at least I don't think anymore.
Yeah.
I think all of it's kind of buttoned up enough, I'd say.
Yeah, and at the same time, like if you're worried about Luka flopping or trying to draw fouls, like SGA shoots a lot of free throws also. So like, I think it's just kind of a streak that works both ways. Like I said, it's just kind of how basketball is played these days. Yeah,
well, last night, I believe the Thunder at one point had double or even more than double the amount of foul shots, and we're still down 8 at one point to the Mavericks last night. And hearing that stat, I was like, well, actually, that's really bad. That means that we're barely staying in the game as opposed to we should be in the game, when it comes down to fouls. Well, also want to ask you, though, I think the most fun topic I can Thunder-wise here, and not ask you about, hey, do you think we're going to win the finals and all type of stuff, because at the end of the day, I know I'm too biased and to say no. I think we're going to win the whole thing every year. But with that being said, if you could clone one Thunder player to make 4 more of them, and that's your starting lineup, just going forward, I'm saying just, maybe just against the Mavs, or if you want to take it the whole way, which player are you choosing? Yeah,
I think we discussed this slightly beforehand. I think I'm going J-Dub, and I understand he didn't have a great game last night. But, I don't know, he's listed at 6'7", 6'8". He's long, he can handle, he can shoot. I think those, you'd like to say SGA, but then he's gonna get back down in the post every single possession. Yeah. So I'd like to say SGA, but yeah, I think J-Dub is my way to go. Like Chet is an option. I just don't know that Chet handles as well, doesn't pass as well. So I think that kind of gets a little sticky. But I think those are the 2 options that people would argue, and I think I'm going to go to J-Dub just based on he's a little more versatile, I feel like, than Chet.
Yeah, I want to say the MVP guy on our team. Yeah. I want to say Jay, but then seeing how much he does help over off of PJ Washington, and then PJ Washington can just apparently just decide one day he wants to make every 3 he's ever taken in his life, does make me a little nervous choosing Shea, but I think that's who I would pick if I'm not going to pick Chet. And that's just surely off of the fun of watching basketball. I mean, if you were creating a player on NBA 2K, I think we're all creating Wembanyama now. But if we're creating a Thunder player, it's definitely got to be Chet at that point, right?
Yeah. And, he can block, he can shoot. He's a better handler than most people who are 6'1" or 6'2" or whatever, or 7'1" or 7'2" or whatever he is. But yeah, in terms of like this basketball team actually needs to win, I think, you maybe need a little bit more skills than what he's got on the ball. So, I think I would go J-Dub, but I definitely understand the Chet argument for sure.
All right. Well, I think I'm with you on that one though. J-Dub as of last night, maybe not, but every other game, can't pick you apart too much on that. And the defense he plays is incredible too. Yeah. Especially against other guards and then other kind of bigs as well. I mean, when they Thunder announced the starting lineups, that's always the weirdest deal to me is they announced Shea, of course, at guard, but they announced J-Dub, a guy who's 6'7", 6'6", whatever it may be, at a forward. Yeah. I'm like, well, isn't Shea the same height? And you've got just everyone's playing all positions now. It's crazy. Yeah, that's just basketball. It's kind of like, we talked about football defenses earlier and how it's pretty fluid out there. You do need a guy in the NBA who's around 7 foot. But other than that, it's you think back to Cade Cunningham, 6'6", 6'7". He's pretty much a true point guard. Like that's just kind of who he is. That's just kind of where basketball is. Everybody's somewhat Magic Johnson at this point. It's only a cool thing. Yeah, only it's a beautiful thing. All right, well, very, very last question here, just because I thought of it. I know I'm wearing some Nike Dunks. I know you've always got the shoe game on lock too, with wearing some Jordans and stuff. Do you think now that OU's not in the Big 12, or maybe that has nothing to do with it, that Oklahoma State's the next Jordan Brand, or is it another Big 12 school that comes in as Jordan Brand? And I want to say I'm forgetting a school that already is a Jordan Brand school, like Houston or somebody, but I can't remember of anyone being. I think Houston is Jordan. I think Houston is Jordan Brand. I don't know that it affects OSU too much. I bet it's more of it's just kind of like a national. They're going to pick who they want. It'd probably lean like Colorado right now, just because Dion and all the hype that's going on over there. I don't know what Dion. I don't even know what Colorado. I think Colorado's a Nike school, but I don't know that for sure. So like, would I love for Oklahoma State to become a Jordan school? Absolutely. I've taken a step back in my shoe buyings because of A, my bank account, and then B, my wife pretty much picks out what I wear every day. So, but yeah, I would love for Oklahoma State to become a Jordan school, just because, the orange and all the, I need that. I do too. There's quite a few different colorways of Jordans that'd be great to have an OSU, player exclusive or just see, but also I do think it's now time where, okay, every single conference should have at least one Jordan school, maybe not the Pac-2, but with that being said, I just think it adds just more excitement. I mean, that's all we're really after at the end of the day, right? If that makes a player who lives in New Jersey and has never heard of Oklahoma State all of a sudden go, wait, who? And then all of a sudden we're reaching out with the Jordan logo on. It's like, all right, well, cool. Maybe I'll go play golf for them, or tennis or football or basketball, or, I mean, who knows? I mean, the other day I learned Arizona State has hockey. So, Yeah, I think that the Nike partnership has been very good for, we talked about smaller school or smaller sports earlier. I remember asking Dave Smith a couple of years ago how important the Nike deal was for track. And he said that they got some high-level recruit in that literally whenever she, got all these offers, she was looking at all the list and she just cut off any school who wasn't a Nike school, because, if in track and field and cross country and things like that, like the shoes you're wearing are a ginormous deal. And obviously Nike and Jordan are two branches of the same company really, but so I'm much rather it be Nike than Under Armour. That's all I'll have to say. Yeah, talking earlier about how some of my family is UCLA fans and the whole Under Armour deal they had going on. I was like, can I not buy one UCLA jersey that's the same color year over year, made by the same company with the same branding, same everything, and I just couldn't figure it out. So that was one of the more bizarre things. But yeah, I'm happy we're a Nike school. I'll say it that way. Nike or Adidas. Yeah. Either way, but definitely happy it's Nike at this point. Could be worse. Would I love for it to be Jordan? Sure. But could definitely be a lot worse. All right. Well, Marshall, I know everyone's already found you, because at this point, if you're listening to Oklahoma State Podcast and you have not heard of Marshall Scott, then I don't know what you're doing to Pistols Firing, but where can everyone find you in case they haven't? So Twitter is at Marshall Scott OK. The Pistols one is at Pistol Skies. Facebook, I imagine you just type in Pistols Firing. I don't use Facebook very often. And then pistolsfiringblog.com. And yeah, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Hey,